Okay, welcome everybody. I believe that we're going to go ahead and get started now, and I believe that I've turned off any kind of waiting room functions or anything like that, so it should just allow participants to join as as they're able to hop in. For anyone who just joined, I'm going to try to monitor the chat while we are going along, but we will have time for questions at the end if I missed something, or perhaps it's just a question that's better dealt with after we get a little more information behind us. So with that said, I'm just going to go ahead and jump in here. Okay. Can I get a message in the chat from someone just to confirm that you're seeing the PowerPoint and that everything is looking good? I would really appreciate that. Or thumbs up or whatever you're able to do. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead. Okay, great. Thank you very much, Berwin. All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump in then. So start out, my name is Justin Edge. Stop the screen share for a minute. This is what I look like. I am a staff attorney at the community legal clinics at University of Illinois Chicago's School of Law. And flipping back onto the PowerPoint here. Specifically, I work with the Community Enterprise and Solidarity Clinic. And I won't read all that off to you, but that tells you a little bit about what we do. We, not only represent businesses and nonprofits that operate to benefit underserved communities, but we do a lot of community education such as this. And then we've also been involved with what we call the Social Equity Cannabis Initiative, which has been our program of providing technical assistance to cannabis businesses, specifically social equity cannabis businesses. But any information that we provide is, you can share out to any type of cannabis business. A lot of it is applicable to most of those. For at least the rest of the month of September, there's a link at the end of our presentation. I'll go ahead and send around the presentation to all participants after we get finished. But there's a link to call in for brief legal advice, 30-minute legal advice sessions that we do that can provide you some quick legal advice on issues related to this. But then we will also be teaching another workshop, and you'll see as we get into this, the next presentation that we're planning, that we are going to be doing on September 28th, that's a Wednesday, September 28th at 6 p.m. There's a link to it at the end of this, is going to have significant new information. Basically, what we're all here to learn about, the new licensing process, for the new dispensary rules, is expected to be finalized at a committee meeting in Springfield on September 13th. So it is not yet finalized at this point, though it is almost certain to be finalized then, and it looks like it won't be any changes from what we're going to review today. All right, so this is what we're going to be discussing today. We are going to go over a little bit that you may be familiar with already from the way that the regulations and the law for the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act have been set up in the past, just because some businesses are still dealing with that, with the system as it stands right now, with getting their conditional licenses they may have been awarded into the full-fledged license. We'll go over that a little bit, but also because these changes are modifications on what was existing. So we kind of need to know where we've been to know where we're going to go next. And we have done presentations on a number of other aspects of this, including in the earlier licensing rounds. There were, we did sessions that there's a link to our information page on our website at the end of the presentation, where we have other videos posted where we talked about a lot of the older issues that were coming up with this, deficiency notices and the different types of applications. We did a presentation that provided legal updates in July of this summer that covered craft growers, infuser licenses, transporter licenses. We're going to focus on dispensaries today, and we're going to leave aside, obviously, all the other forms, the medical and all of that. And then just an important note, we're going to touch on this a little bit, but if you currently have a conditional license, which more than likely, if that's the case, you were notified of that in July or August, as in 2022, just passed. If that's the case for you, then you are currently in the 180-day period where you have a lot of things to get finalized, including finding your final location, a number of approvals and things. We'll touch on that briefly, but the authoritative source, obviously, for you are the regulating entities that you're dealing with. So, you should chat with them about any specifics related to that. All right, so why is this all confusing? I wish you didn't need an attorney to explain this, or any kind of specialist. It'd be a better system, I think, if it wasn't the case, but one way or another, it's what we have. And there's a number of reasons. There's the original legislation. There have been changes to the legislation, the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, which we'll be touching on. There's been different proposed legislation enacted into law, changes, like I said, and then there have been regulations issued as well as agency actions. There are a number of agencies involved. If you're familiar with this area, you might know that the craft grower, the transporter, and the infuser licenses are all handled through Department of Agriculture, Illinois Department of Agriculture. But what we're dealing with today is primarily the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulations, IDFPR. And they are the ones who are handling all of the regulations related to dispensaries in the past, as well as anything that's going to be coming up with these new changes. So that's primarily the agency we're involved with here. The other piece, though, is DCEO, and that is the agency that is dealing with technical assistance for social equity applicants, such as the work that we're providing here. But they are also the agency that's working with lenders to provide loans to social equity applicants. And for anyone who's been following that, there have been a number, it's taken a long time to roll out that program. And I know some people have been frustrated with that, but there is some good news. The first loans are now rolling. They have, things worked out with their lending partners, the banks that you work with directly, and the application process is still live, and this is the best time, to get involved at this point because it is finally up and running. There's additional information on their website about the size of the loans, but to give you a sense, for transporters, it's going to be capped at 100,000. But for infusers or dispensaries, can be upwards to a $500,000 loan. It's a loan with a bank partner, so obviously there are qualifications and things, but they are meant for social equity applicants. So make sure you check that out, because financing these businesses is one of the most difficult parts of this. And then we'll be going through some timelines that'll sort some of this stuff out, but you've heard about lotteries for licenses. There were lotteries in 2021. There have been additional ones, corrective lotteries in 2022. We'll discuss some of those and straighten them all out throughout this, but it's confusing stuff. And there's going to be a new lottery process with this new social equity dispensary applicant process that we'll be discussing. And you also may have heard of HB 1443. That made some really important changes to many of the social equity advocates in the state. That was seen as a huge victory. I'll point out some of those changes as we go along, but it didn't fix everything. And that's why we're going to have a new process here going forward, but I'll try to explain some of the things that it changed. And if it seems like there are new things announced all the time, you're right. But I'll try to explain some of the confusion around that, because new licenses don't necessarily mean things that have not existed before. It just means that they're finally in the process of announcing things or finishing up a lottery, or people are moving from a conditional license to the full license and can start business. So we'll begin with where it all started, right? And discuss some of the changes that were made in 2021 with that House bill made changes. So don't obviously try to read all this right now. If you're familiar with the program as it's existed, this is the definition as it first began. Some of the changes here, or I'll point out the general shape of it, is ownership by individuals who are in residents of disproportionately impacted areas. I'll briefly discuss that after this. Or they have war on drugs criminal involvement, and that's how that's defined there. The latter part of this, having 10 full-time employees, more than half of whom meet that definition, this has effectively been dropped at this point. This is no longer part of the social equity applicant definition for social equity justice involved under the changes that were made last summer. So the licenses that were just put up through lottery last summer, as well as these, and then parts of this are also changing with the new regulations as well. So, but parts of it that will remain include these definitions of, actually having justice involvement related to the failed war on drugs or family members who have been affected by it. So those parts will remain. So this is what disproportionately impacted areas means. Follow the link and take a look at the map where you can look up things by address. Obviously, you'd want to be certain about that. So, don't try to, figure out where all these roads are and everything from this picture. But they use a formula for this. You can see some of the neighborhoods that are included there. You can kind of see it on a picture of the city of Chicago there and some of Cook County. But there are disproportionately impacted areas all over the state of Illinois. And so make sure you check out that on the DCEO website. And like I said, DCEO is your source to go to for the social impact or the social equity applicant related issues such as these. The general licensing agency is IDFPR, that's licensing the dispensaries. So, and in addition to getting some, bonus points on the original applications as they were set up, there were reductions there continue to be reductions in fees for social equity applicants, access to those loans, like I was mentioning, that are finally going to roll out here soon, and technical assistance and support of this type. If you look at the technical assistance support information on DCEO's website, you'll see that it's not just us. There are other technical service providers, including legal, including a lot of business planning, including a lot of really, really focused work built around the application and all the pieces of the application. We'll see how the application is changing with these new rules when we get into that, but just know that you're still going to have to turn in, we assume that it's going to be pretty much the same set of information, even though the application process is changing a lot. And then just real briefly, I assume that everybody's here because we're discussing dispensary organizations, but that's the definition of it. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the retail operations, not the growers, not the craft growers, not the infusers, but where the rubber hits the road, where the consumers come in and purchase the product. And this has, if you look at the perceived and I would say true failings of the early rollout of cannabis business licenses in the state of Illinois, it's been felt most and seen most in the dispensaries. Because there's potentially a lot of money to be made here. This is what they were trying to get at, was opportunities for people who were affected by the war on drugs or lived in neighborhoods that were impacted, give them opportunities for these businesses. But if you've read any of the news, you know that it hasn't worked as well as they thought. That's why there has been legislative changes and additional rules. So they're really focusing now on the dispensaries because that has been one of the biggest failings. This is just some general information about the dispensary licenses. This is the way that the rules were originally set up. And there are a couple little tweaks to this that were made under House Bill 1443. However, I'll get to in a minute why I'm not going to spend much time on this. Basically, there were a number of licenses, conditional licenses, that were issued in July and August of this year, of 2022, that are under these original rules and the ways in which they were modified by 1443. But going forward, it looks like a lot, this isn't going to be the most accurate information. Parts of this will still be true. Parts that will be seem to be the fees and the fee structure, the 50% reduced fees for social equity applicants. A lot of the same information you'll have to get together. Same entities seeing to the oversight of the programs, and the same basic setup that there is a conditional license issued, which does not enable you to start buying cannabis products, selling cannabis products, anything like that. The conditional is the early conditional form of the license that enables you to get through the next steps. Go ahead and get your physical space worked out. Go ahead and do any type of build out that requires, and then get all the necessary approvals from the oversight regulatory organization. So those parts will all remain the same, and presumably the renewals and fees and all of that will be basically on the same schedule. So with the licenses that were the conditional licenses that were announced in July and August of 2022, as well as the 55 new licenses that are planned under these new regulations that are expected to become finalized on September 13th of this month. It's still going to follow this basic plan, right? It's based on population across these BLS regions, that's Bureau of Labor Statistics. You can see here just an example of how 75 of them 75 of them are split up. Excuse me there. So, you know, you can do the math if you want to, but, you know, you can see right there, you know, that ends up being about 63% end up in those counties: Cook, Lake, Will, DuPage, Kane, Kendall, Grundy, McHenry, that up there with the 47 in the top right. All right, so that's what we're going to presume will be the same going forward. All right, so, and then this is what have been the parts of the application in the past. And so if you actually have a conditional license right now, you know all this because you put it together. It's a lot of information. It requires a lot of time and a lot of money, really, to get all of this together and to have a successful application. All of these portions were graded by the regulatory departments for each type, or for the dispensaries by IDFPR. They were graded, or points were awarded based on all these things. So you already are familiar with this if that's your situation. If we're talking about the future of with these new regulations that are going to come into place, we don't know for certain, but presumably, presumably the way that it all stands right now, it just reverses the order. In the past, you had to put together this whole application, put it in, wait for it to be graded, and then either be awarded the license, or in cases of ties, go to lotteries and all the different forms of that have been happening since 2019 when this is first passed. The way that it's going to work with the new regulations is a very simplified, streamlined online application, very little information comparatively, that you put in with a $250 fee, and that gets you in the lottery. And after you are awarded, if you're chosen in that lottery, we presume you're still going to have to put all this information together, because all of these things, or at least some approval of them, whether they're graded or not, will be required because they're required under the statute as it stands. So that's one of the tips that I'll have for you is, it takes more than 180 days or whatever time period they're going to end up allowing after you hear that you have a conditional license to get this type of stuff together. So getting ahead of it a little bit will help. So, and you've heard, I'm sure, about all of the different things that have held this up, and it's confusing and it's in the news all the time. There have been changes to the law, as I mentioned. There are new regulations. The scoring criteria have changed, and there have, the industry has been monopolized, particularly the cultivation centers and the dispensaries early on by the big money outside operations that moved in first in the days of medical before adult use was passed in 2019. And that's just the way it is. I think that these new regulations are going to be good. Maybe I think parts of House Bill 1443 and the changes it made were better for social equity applicants. There have been changes made to the transporter, infuser, and craft grower programs as well that have improved things for social equity applicants. But really, I think the most progress we're going to see on those issues in dispensaries is ahead with these new regulations. So generally, we're discussing two things here. We're not discussing those early forms of dispensary licenses that the early adopter medical organizations that first got in grabbed up. We're talking about what became available through House Bill 1443 and the changes that it made, how that was stalled for over a year by a bunch of litigation, and then how it was finally put back into motion. So the lotteries that were created, one of the things that it did was a social equity applicant special category with licenses dedicated to that removed that at least 10 full-time employees, at least half of which are, and then the rest of that definition, it removed that portion of it. So it was what it called social equity justice involved applicants. As long as you scored 85% or higher on the points on your application and you were a social equity justice involved applicant, then you were up for those 55 licenses. So you may have already been notified about that. The ones in the Chicago area were notified in, and you can see here that they were notified in July 22nd. So very recently. Then you have 180 days in which you lock down your location, or secure your location, but also all the other steps, the security that you have to have installed, all of the approvals for everything, all of that stuff. So it's a lot to get done. If you're in the middle of that right now, again, we're going to be talking about the going forward, but if you're in the middle of that right now, this is what, this applies to you. So folks may have been actually chosen in the lottery that took place in that one, and there are two other types as well. Those licenses chosen in the summer of 2021, and then there was a judicial stay because of a couple different cases that were going on about it. So the stay just put a pause on everything, and until May of this year, that's where it's set, just on pause. In May, the judicial stay was lifted, and there was another case that had to be resolved to provide more guidance. And then that's when they began issuing licenses in June of this year, announcing the winners, really. Then they did what were called corrective lotteries for some of the additional slots for these licenses that weren't yet filled, and then began issuing them in July, like I mentioned. So anyway, if that's you and that's your case and you had an application in, that's what's going on with that. If you had an application in and you're wondering, well, I haven't heard anything back, you can go on IDFPR's website in the adult use cannabis dispensary section. It's right on the front page. Click in there and you can see a list of all the applicants. If you were notified that you were chosen through one of these lotteries, but yet what's going on now? I didn't hear anything back on July 22nd. That is because they are still awaiting paperwork from you. So that's one of the points that they're making. There are only 3 of those remaining at this point, but they're still waiting for some additional things before they can issue the finalized license. So these were the licenses. They called them the 2021 lotteries. That's when they first took place. But like I said, there were more just this summer, and people are notified at this point. That's kind of where things stand for those folks. You know, if that's you, but if that's not you, in a way, you can almost put this out of your mind now. I mean, all these regulations and rules and everything are still on the books. They could potentially issue new licenses under these rules in the future, but the way that the new regulations are set up, it looks like they're going to move toward that system. So that's the latest on that. And this is some additional information to check out if you were in fact selected during the lottery. They're going to need information related to tax compliance and principal officer affirmations and things like that. That's what they're putting together. And as we were seeing that, we were seeing some common legal issues coming up. And I think that some of these we can anticipate even under the new system. And that would be changes in ownership structure. You have to submit an ownership table that explains percentages of ownership for everyone involved, principal officers as they're known, and the owners of the parent companies. If part of your dispensary operation is owned by a legal entity that's owned by someone else, you have to keep going up the tree, right? Up the hierarchy of those things. So there's reporting requirements for all of those. There are limits on the number of licenses. For instance, the general rule is across the board at this point with all the active licensing programs is that you can't have a principal officer who owns an ownership stake in more than 10 licensed cannabis operations. The early cannabis operation or dispensary operations, those were the ones that were medical that rolled in the very first phase, or these applicants under this program or the new one. In fact, you can lose the applicants who have been selected can lose their licenses if they are found to have one owner or more who now have an ownership stake in an 11th operation. So those types of limits have forced some organizations to go through some changes in ownership, and you have to notify IDFPR of all of those. So that is what that is all about. But let's get to the new system, and and when I say finalized soon, that's fingers crossed, right? That it's going to happen in September, because you'll see here it was announced in March. It looked like it may have been finalized in mid-July, and then it's been extended and delayed a little bit. But as of right now, it's on the agenda in its finalized, what looks to be its finalized form for this committee meeting that's happening, where the final approval will take place on September 13th. So you may have heard some of these announcements and press releases and news articles about the new system, right? It's going to be simple. It's going to be all online. It's going to be cheaper. Like I mentioned before, this is the biggest change. Before, you had to put in all the money, all of the time, all of these things, get your ownership structure together. In some cases, get together employment contracts and things like that. All of that in place, all that money and time before you could even submit an application, and then hope you're one of the top applicants. What a waste, right? What a waste of your time, what a waste of money, and what a way to block out people who have been hurt by the war on drugs, or just don't have the kind of resources at their disposal that the winning applicants have, right? So this, at its core, this is a lot better because it reverses it essentially. It says, get together the basic information and put in an application through this online application system. Basically what it is name, address, lead contact information, certify that you are going to qualify as a social equity applicant under the new definition of that, which we'll get to, and tell us who your principal officers are, who owns, who has an ownership stake or is going to be managing the place. Generally, that's what that means. So yeah. So ultimately, will you have to get all that stuff together? Will it be simple? Will it all be one online form? No, you'll have to get together a lot of that same information. You'll have to secure property. You'll have to get a security system that matches the regulations. You'll have to get approval for all these things. You'll have to get together the financing that you need to build it out, all of these things. But at least you can do that after you know that you won a license in the lottery. There's something at the end for you. So in that way, it's an improvement. So it's all done through these regulations. It's not done through a new law. This wasn't done through something passed at the General Assembly in Springfield. This is all done through regulations that are rolling out. And that's why, if it seems like, well, why is this being decided in some meeting room in Springfield at a meeting on September 13th? That's why, because regulations were proposed and this oversight board is given the task, it's called JCAR, of doing the final administrative approval, looking at some legal issues, but also looking at, like, is this actually a good idea for economic reasons and whatever. And there was a first draft of the regulations. There's been some major changes in a draft that was released on June 21st. And we'll talk about those. Including some additional things that now qualify you as a social equity applicant. Yeah, and then at this point, it's on the agenda for September 13th. It might be approved that day. That is what we can best expect at this point, that there wouldn't be additional need for another extension. And the press releases from Pritzker's administration and everything else have said that they wanted to get the application window for this announced and opened as soon as possible. So late summer, probably not going to happen, since here late summer is almost passed or has passed. That's when they were trying to get this in place in mid-July. So we can anticipate from what they've said that they're going to try to open up this online application very soon after September 13th, if the regulations are approved. But it'll be a window of time, a window, an opening and a closing. So you'll want to look out for it, because you're going to have to get your information in there before it closes in order to be in the lottery. So some of the improvements, only the social equity applicants are eligible for this lottery. It's another 55 licenses that will be divided out throughout the state. So whatever that is, pro rata for the Chicagoland area, like I mentioned before, it'll end up being, a little bit over 60% of those end up going to the region right around Chicago. Online simplified, yes, and they've made some changes too that will hopefully keep this from being challenged through litigation again, like was when the judicial stay was put in place. It was all on pause for a year. They've made changes that should prevent that reflect a lot of the major challenges that came to the law. So that would mean maybe this can just go forward, or if something is filed, it won't be held up for very long. But like I said, you're still going to be putting together most of that information. So here's the new social equity applicant definition under the new system. Okay, so notice that it doesn't really have the same disproportionately impacted areas definition as before. It's this system that you see here. And so that you don't need to worry about putting all that information together yourself, our sources at the state have told us that, they're going to roll out, along with the online application, an ability to plug in addresses of your owners or your principal officers, their home addresses, to get a sense of whether or not they meet this criteria in column 1, because you've got to have column 1, at least one in column 1 and at least one in column 2. So if you remember from that first definition, 51% of your owners have to have been involved, personal justice involvement from the war on drugs, or a family member had justice involvement from war on drugs related issues, right? So in column 2, those first two, those are the same as the old definition. So you still got to do that for 51% of your owners, of your ownership. And additionally, you have to have something in the owners meeting at least one of those in column 1. I can tell you, if you compare this to the disproportionately impacted area definition, there's a lot of overlap, almost complete overlap. In fact, it may, by some of these, it actually, you can see census tract with a high school dropout rate among 15%. Like, these weren't things that were factored into the disproportionately impacted areas at all. So this is more expansive. So you have to have one of those, and then one thing from column 2, either the ones that existed before or this new element that's been added in, an individual who's been a victim of a firearm injury. That is defined in the new proposed regulations very broadly, but it is, it's not any kind of tricky legal definition. It is basically what it sounds like. You can go into the regulations as soon as they're enacted, and they'll give you the full definition of that. You have to provide documentation of it. Presumably there'd be a police report or some hospital records or things like that. But a victim of a firearm injury now can be one of the qualifying elements. So that's what it takes to be qualified as a social equity applicant under this new system. And those have, like I said, there were changes from the first version of the regulations to the second. There have been no changes since the second. So since June, it's set just like that. So presumably, if you follow this type of stuff, we presume that there aren't going to be changes made on September 13th, unless it's kicked back out of that committee for IDFPR to make some more changes. It looks like this is what it's going to be. So this is the timeline of that whole process. I've described it. They, put into play, they issued a press release and announced all this and the regulations. They made some changes. It went up for review because of a process issue is what they said. They did an extension where they needed to clarify some things, but didn't actually make any changes to the proposed regulations. And so we're looking out for this date on September 13th of this month, when it looks like it's expected that we'll be adopting these, and that the application window would happen shortly after. So like I mentioned, firearm injury victim definition has been added to part of the social equity applicant. If you heard about this, this was a little controversial at first. They reduced the 51% ownership or control requirement. Like 51% of the ownership or control had to be owners or principal officers rather, who met the social equity applicant requirement. In the first version of the regulations that they released in May, or in March, they pulled those back. But the second version restores those. It's 51% still. There was, in the first version, there was a requirement that you purchase your products and services from other social equity applicant businesses. That's not in there any longer. And presumably they'll use this system as at least part of the way they'll issue licenses moving forward. But what they have authorized right now under this is a limited period, a set period. They're authorized to put out 55 new licenses under this system, and it will be everyone that's gathered, that puts in applications during this open application window, and then it will close. They will have a lottery. For those who don't then put forward all their documentation, they're going to pass that 55. They're going to draw a 56th, the 57th, the 58th, because if someone doesn't get their documentation together, it doesn't end up seeing it through, then they'll keep moving down the list. But yeah, it will be up to the businesses after that point to put together all their information to qualify. So it's going to be a lot of work at that point, but at least you get a bite at the apple, a chance to, do something, get an opportunity to make, get an opportunity for one of these licenses before you do put in all that work. All right, so that's really the end of our presentation today. Like I said, I'm going to send this around to all registered attendees. My email address is edg3 at uic.edu. If you got this link from someone else, for instance, and you weren't registered for it, let me know and I'll happily send you this presentation. We're also going to be putting this video up on our website. These links can take you there. You can also just look up UIC Law Social Equity Cannabis, and that will bring you to it. Can I put the email in the chat? Yeah, thanks, Berwin. That's a good idea. And doing that now. The community legal clinics that CSEC is part of, where I work, we take applicants for businesses like I described earlier, nonprofits, businesses, cooperatives, lots of types of operations that work for the benefit of underserved communities generally. We take applications year round. You can find information on our website about that. We don't really go out of our way to preference cannabis businesses above others, but I mean, I'm working with cannabis businesses right now, actually. So we do represent cannabis businesses. However, we're not able to represent everybody. So you apply, and then we bring on law students each new semester. So beginning new client matters in August of each year and then January of each year. And what it is it's an opportunity for the law students to learn through hands-on education, and then licensed attorneys with experience in these areas oversee their work and work with them. So you can find information on our website as well about that. That link at the top there, or through the link that you use to get to this Eventbrite that you're in right now, you can click to that, and where it says organized by, you'll see Community Enterprise and Solidarity Economy Clinic. If you click on that, you'll be able to find links to future presentations, including that September 28th presentation, which please, it'd be great if you attend. Perhaps there will be no changes from the regulations as we see them now, but I'm guessing there might be, or at least there'll be more information. Like if it does pass in the current form, we might actually have an application window and some additional information from IDFPR or the administration at that point. So it's really timely right now. You want to stay on top of this because we don't know how long that application window is going to be open, when it's going to open, how long it'll stay open, but you don't want to miss it. So, please reach out, let us know if we can help you, or if you want to, apply for free legal services through CSEC, just get in touch with us. Like I said, I've got those 30-minute brief legal advice calls. We're probably only doing those through the rest of September, but there you can find more information at that link. We'll get back to you to arrange our time. So that is the end of the presentation. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording right now and stop the screen share. And then we have a few minutes if anyone wants to ask any questions. But if anyone is going to head out, thank you very much for attending today. And with that, I will go ahead and stop the recording. Thanks.